Welcome back to Everything New York Giants. I'm your host, Adriana, also known as New York Giants Fangirl on Instagram and TikTok. And today I am welcomed with Giants beat writer Art Stapleton, who you guys all know and love. Very excited to have him join us today. So welcome, Art. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Adriana. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. So one of the most common questions that I get asked is, how did I become a Giants fan and how did I end up kind of starting this whole thing? So I'd like to ask you the same question. I'm assuming that you grew up in New Jersey, but I'd love to hear more of your history, how you ended up becoming a Giants fan. I know that you went to UMass. I'm sure that was a great experience being around all of those Pats fans for 4 years.
Yeah, no doubt. It's funny. I surprisingly, I know we didn't talk about this before. I didn't grow up a Giants fan in North Jersey. I grew up around Giants fans. But the best thing about it, I'd say, is taking over and starting covering the Giants. I actually married into a Giants family. So my wife is a huge Giants fan. My brother-in-law is a huge Giants fan. My nephews, my father-in-law goes all the way back with the Giants. So, it's kind of funny when you see the Giants. I went to school I was in grammar school in North Jersey, like you said, and the Giants were the team obviously in '86 and then early 90s. But you had a lot of Cowboys fans, 49ers fans, and it's one of those things where you don't have to grow up a fan of a team to truly embrace the story and the way the franchise is run. So I think I've gotten close to a lot of the stories within the Giants history to kind of know that, I could see why people would think that I'm a fan. But I grew up in the shadow of MetLife Stadium. I know what the Giants are all about. So from that perspective, and I'm reminded every time I come home that, the Giants are the team that everyone wants to be rooting for around here.
Mm-hmm. I always joke around because I grew up in Ramsey, and North Jersey, I think for the most part, when I was growing up, was really split. You were either a Giants fan or a Jets fan, and there were, a handful of Cowboys fans, and that was pretty much it. And I always joke that, like, thank God my grandpa was a Giants fan and we all ended up Giants fans, because if we were Jets fans, it would have been a whole lot worse.
Yeah, I grew up in Bergen County too, so you're in those situations. I mean, it's kind of a weird scenario in terms of, everybody likes to follow a front runner, and how do you become a fan of a team, and is there such thing as a loyalty? Some people feel like you can float and fall in love with different teams for different reasons. So it's just fun how things kind of pan out. And now, like you said, everybody thinks that because you cover a team, you're a fan of that team. But unfortunately, in sports journalism, you kind of have to look at it and say, if I cover the team, I can't really be a fan of them.
Right.
It takes a lot to be critical or look with a critical eye. But I think there's nuance involved too. I mean, look, you're a fan, you're a lifelong fan, but I think you probably can look at the Giants with a critical eye and say what's good, what's bad. I think the idea of a fan has evolved over the years. You're not just, running out there and saying, oh, everything is good and I don't want to talk about the bad. Well, for the Giants, unfortunately, within the last 10 years, you've seen a lot of bad. So if you're not critical, I think people will look at you and say, really? That you think, 4-12 is good? I think that at that point you get to a certain level where you have to embrace the good with the bad.
Definitely. That's how I ended up starting this whole thing. I moved to Connecticut about two and a half years ago, and it was, in the height of the Joe Judge era. And I was new to the area. I didn't know anyone. And I kind of figured, with a lot of people still being home a little bit, that social media was a great way to meet people. And, I've always been a big Giants fan. So I was like, I need people to talk to about this, because it's such a disaster. And I'm just in my house screaming at my TV alone. Like, I need people to commiserate this with me, because it's so awful. But I do think that Giants fans, for the most part, are able to be critical when necessary, and then be optimistic too when when the feeling is good. I mean, there are also fans who, after last season, Jones got a lot of criticism. He didn't deserve the deal, overpaid, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's always interesting to see the different sides of the fan base and what everyone thinks and agrees with or disagrees with. But I want to talk about your career a little bit. So how did you end up, if you weren't a diehard Giants fan, which I assume a lot of beat writers, that's one of the reasons why they got into it, is they have this passion for the team and want to talk about them. And I know that's one of the reasons why Patty Traina got into it, and same thing with Chris Visignano. So for you, it sounds like you might have a little bit of a different story of how you got into covering the team.
Well, I covered, like I said, I work for the Bergen Record, which growing up in Ramsey, the Record, and I worked there. I mean, that was my hometown paper. It was delivered to my driveway. My dad still has it delivered. He's one of the, the old schoolers who still gets the print edition delivered to his house, to my parents' house where I grew up. I wanted to be a sports writer when I was in college at UMass. I go back a little bit of ways. I was there when John Calipari was the head coach. So we had 4 great years of the basketball team. So I always envisioned becoming a college basketball writer at that time. I worked at the school paper, covered a bunch of different sports. And then when I graduated, I came back to New Jersey. We all know how this market is. And it was not easy to get a job. So I ended up working part-time covering high schools in Central Jersey. Yes, I believe Central Jersey exists. It's not just
I agree too.
And then my first full-time job was up here for the Herald News, which ultimately was bought out by the Record. And I covered high schools for a long time, right up until 2009 when I joined our NFL team. And I was passionate about everything that I covered. I love football, love baseball, I love basketball. Really, I covered everything, hockey, and the opportunity just came to really be a part of our coverage team in different sports. And I ended up doing this. And then we had a long time Giants beat writer, Vinny DeTrani, for the Record for a long time. And he ended up retiring. Someone took over him for a year, but I was the columnist and kind of I want to say co-beat writer, because that would be the slight to who had the beat. But then we turned it over and they wanted me to become the full-time beat writer. So I was really on it from 2009, but 2011, the end of 2011 is really when I took over. And that's how I landed here. And just the idea of covering a beat, and there's no better beat to be on, to have a family. The travel is a lot less hectic than if you were going to be on baseball, hockey, or basketball. That wasn't necessarily a choice at the time, but I just love football, fell into the Giants. And like we've talked about from the beginning, you're talking about a flagship franchise in this area, and anywhere you go, you see someone wearing a Giants hat or a Giants shirt. And to be honest, you think of somebody, I wonder if that person reads my coverage, if that person follows me on Twitter, do they listen to my podcast? So that's kind of how I ended up becoming one of the beat writers, and kind of been diversifying ever since with everything that we have to do on the beat.
Yeah, and you have a lot of amazing coverage. And I know from a lot of people that I've spoken to, a lot of other fans, they all love the work that you do. And I think as a beat writer, it can be challenging, and people probably either love or hate a lot of the things that come out from the writers specifically. But there's one article or one series that I want to talk about that you do. And I think you said it's the 5th year that you're doing it so far. And it's the annual top 12 most impactful players.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that this year is the first, or maybe the second year in the last 5 years, that it probably was difficult to choose 12, being that we finally have a lot of pretty good talent in here. So can you tell us a little bit of the history of how this started? And then when it comes to the players, what type of qualifications, skills, what goes into it from your mind that you're looking into choosing them for the upcoming season?
Sure. To be honest, we're always looking for new things to kind of catch, people's eyes and wanting people to read it. And we go back 5 years, it was not a good scenario for the Giants. So you're looking to get people to read, and everybody likes rankings. Everybody likes lists, but I didn't just want to put out rankings just for the sake of having rankings. So what we did is we try to come up, we didn't want to say the best players, because sometimes that doesn't necessarily reflect in a season. Graham Gano, I think, is one of the top 3 kickers in the NFL right now, and I wouldn't necessarily say his impact is the same as some of the guys that I have on the list. So what I go into is I kind of look at it and say, all right, if this guy was not on the team, what would happen? If this person raises their level to what maybe some of the people inside the building believe that they can go from one year to the next, what would that do to the unit that they represent? What would that do to the offensive line? How would that affect, the defense and the run defense and where guys would fit? So I kind of go that route, and it's not an exact science. That's certainly the case. Last year, I left Dexter Lawrence off the list, and you could probably make the argument that he was at least 1B on the list for this team last year. And maybe you can make the argument, with he and Daniel Jones and Saquon, certainly in the first half with Saquon, but across the board. So I'm not perfect. I'll make the list, and then hopefully it causes some discussion. But I think it's a fun thing to kind of talk impact. Where would this team be without this player? Especially if this player does well, or if this player does not do well. And I think that's also a part of it. If this player does not meet expectations, how will that impact this team? And I think the last couple of years, Daniel Jones was number 1 on my list, and his performance really impacted this team positively last year, and then negatively really the last 2 years, 2 years prior, because he just wasn't healthy enough. He wasn't on the field. He got hurt, and that affected the Giants too. So it's a fun list to put together. It's kind of a weird spot with 2 weeks to go before training camp, but trying to push it out there. So I appreciate you taking notice.
Yeah, of course. Is there anyone on that list that might surprise people?
Yeah. I think, like, for example, Adoree Jackson's already come out. I think I put him 10, if I'm not mistaken. And he's not the highest cornerback on the list. I have Deonte Banks higher than Adoree Jackson, because I believe that if the Giants are going to take that next step in the secondary, we know what Adoree can give them. We also know what they look like when Adoree's not there. So that's a big impact. But I do think that Deonte Banks, if he comes in here this year and surpasses expectations, you look at what Sauce Gardner did with the Jets last year, what Tariq Woolen did with the Seahawks. If Deonte Banks all of a sudden has that kind of impact opposite Adoree Jackson in the secondary with Xavier McKinney back, I think that kind of raises the level of Wink Martindale's defense. So that would be a surprise for me. That's kind of where I'm looking as far as what guys can kind of impact this team just out of the gate, and where they take their game and how it would matter. I had Kadarius Toney 3rd last year on this team. He didn't make, barely made Halloween for this team, and it did not have an impact. But it had a negative impact with this team, because going into the season, we all thought that he was going to have a major role on this offense. So those are the kind of guys that, you put in these rankings and you try to figure out what they're going to be, but you project something and then, it was completely off. So that's kind of what I did with a couple of the guys on this list that are coming up, is the idea that, what can they be? What can Kayvon Thibodeau be in year 2? Can he be the kind of player that kind of generates the attention that Dexter Lawrence did last year? Because now if you have Dex and Kayvon, now you're talking a completely different defense, because teams are going to start having to pick their poison rather than sending attention a certain way. So that's kind of a little insight in terms of what I've looked for on that list.
Okay. When we talk about impactful players, and I was thinking about this last night because I almost forget that there were so many draft picks in 2022, and a lot of them contributed, but also a lot of them ended up with injuries, and we didn't get to see the full scope of maybe what they would have been last season. So, do you, based on last year's draft class, who do you think is going to take the biggest step forward and be the most impactful on this team next year, just out of those guys?
That's great. Well, let's take the first rounders out of the mix, right? I mean, we know Kayvon and Evan Neal. Evan Neal, who's also on my list. He actually is number 9 that came out today as we're talking. I think there are question marks. And I think it's tough to peg Wandell, right? Because we don't know when he's going to be ready. Is he going to be ready out of the gates? If Wandell is healthy, he's going to be a big part of this offense. I don't think there's any question. I just can't say definitively he's going to be there week 1. I mean, he had an ACL in December. It's kind of hard to predict that. So I'm going to say I'll give you 2 guys. One, I know, and I believe you spoke about him a little bit. I saw some of your Instagram videos. Dane Belton, I think will get an opportunity this year. It'll be interesting to see what role he is playing in the secondary, because a lot last year he ended up playing a lot of center field. I don't know necessarily if that's where Dane fits. He obviously added his interceptions. I mean, he made plays when he was out there, but his clavicle was never 100%. So he's one that I think an opportunity is there, especially if Wink looks to play more sub packages. And the other player that I think, look, we loved him in August, and then he tore his ACL, is Darian Beavers, because I think of his versatility. He can play on the edge. He plays inside. I would love to see him, even in a sub package format, being the guy that's next to Bobby Okereke, and you almost transform your defense. You can have Okereke play the linebacker, and then have Beavers kind of do different things, rush the passer. So if I had to say right now, the one guy I would talk about is Darian Beavers. But again, we're talking about his ACL from last summer. So there are some injury questions with that draft class from last year. But Beavers and Belton are probably the 2 guys that I'm most excited about. I think the other ones are kind of constant. You know what you're going to get from Kayvon, Evan, Wandell if he's healthy. I think Daniel Bellinger will still have a big role on this team. Maybe not fantasy-wise, but I think Bellinger will be a very good player to complement Darren Waller at the position better than most people would think, I believe, going into year 2.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And Beavers, the linebacker battle is something that I'm definitely going to be focused on during camp, and we can talk more about that in a second. But I wanted to ask, do you have any expectations or any idea of what you'll think we'll get from guys like DJ Davidson and Marcus McKethan, who we really didn't see last year because of the injuries? And I believe Bobby Johnson said it looks like they might be ready to go, so they should be healthy for then, but I guess we'll see.
It's interesting. I mean, I think McKethan will get an opportunity to be a reserve guy on the line, and maybe he surprises as a swing tackle possibility. Maybe he can play inside. Maybe that pushes guys like a Matt Parrott a lot closer to the bubble. What happens with Tyree Phillips. But I think from a Davidson perspective, you've got a loaded room right now. And the idea of we got to see what Ashawn Robinson's health looks like, and Nacho obviously coming in. I don't know where Davidson fits. Ryder Anderson is there. He had a surprisingly effective rookie year as an undrafted guy. But look, they liked DJ Davidson enough last year. That was really a deep scouted pick. It's not like DJ Davidson jumped off the page and people were talking about him at the combine or anything like that. But if I had to guess, I would say McKeithen has a little bit better chance than Davidson to kind of factor in and kind of make some moves. I don't know if Davidson gets that opportunity right off the bat to even challenge for a roster spot unless there are injuries to those guys up front, because I think they looked at that defensive line last year and said, we need to get better and more experienced behind Dexter and Leo. And I think they've done that. Let's see if it holds up, starting in week 1 and how these guys carry through. But I think they still like Davidson and McKeithen, but it is almost like they're coming in as rookies again. And now this roster is a little bit deeper, so it's going to be a little harder for those guys to make the roster. We don't know what Joe Schoen does with draft picks, though. We don't know if he's going to be leery to move beyond a draft pick from last year. You know what I mean? So you don't want to put a guy on waivers and have a chance to lose a draft pick that way. They did it in Buffalo a couple times, and they ended up losing draft picks. Wyatt Teller in Cleveland, I believe, the offensive lineman, they let him go. Buffalo had him early on and let him go, and he goes on and he becomes a Pro Bowler and a stud offensive lineman. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops with those guys. And, there's only so many spots, and you're not going to sub out a Davidson for an Ashawn Robinson or a Nacho. So we'll see. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of competition in a lot of positions. So when we talk about training camp, we talk about the linebackers briefly. I think that the cornerback position is going to be competitive, maybe not so much for the starting opposite of Dory Jackson, but maybe for some of the guys, that are going to be battling it out for the second spot. And then, wide receiver is going to be another big one that we have to watch out for. But another position, too, is left guard. And I think we haven't really seen a ton from Joshua Ezeudu, but Joe Schoen speaks very highly of him. Do you think that we're going to see a rotation between him and Bredesen at left guard this year, or at least during camp, just to see what we have in him?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. We're going to see Ezeudu in that competition. I don't know if he wins that competition in week 1, but it would not surprise me to see Bredesen becoming their most valuable reserve offensive lineman and have Ezeudu win that job. The big thing for Ezeudu is pass protection. I mean, obviously he's coming back from the neck injury that kind of, really cut his rookie year abruptly, and that was it. And it just kind of, it was uncertainty the rest of the way. Was he going to get surgery? Was he not? That kind of thing. But I think ideally they're probably going to start the season with Bredesen at left guard and John Michael Schmitz at center. But it would not surprise me to see Ezeudu get reps at left guard. He was very good in the run game in certain games that he played last year. Obviously small sample size, but I do think that Ezeudu will have an opportunity to take that job. And then you want to have Bredesen fresh because he's your backup at center. You need him in case of emergency with John Michael Schmitz. If Schmitz doesn't come along early on, I think they'll deal with the consequences and just, ride it out. But I don't think you can lose a guy like Bredesen if you have an opportunity to kind of split those guys up. So I don't know necessarily a rotation, but I do think Ezeudu will have an opportunity this year.
Yeah, I'm excited to see more from him because, like you said, the few games that we saw out of him, he looked like he was pretty good, at least a decent start. Let's talk about wide receiver because there's 14 of them on the roster right now. Obviously, they're not all going to make it. Assuming that the Giants keep 6, I'm hearing that maybe there's a possibility that they keep 7, but I guess let's go based off of 6 right now. Wandale is likely going to start on PUP. It seems like Shep might be ready to go week 1. I think that's something that we'll probably all look out for in camp. But aside from, we've got Paris Campbell, Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, and Jalen Hyatt, who are probably the set four right now.
Yep.
Who do you think is really battling it out for those last two spots? And do you have any predictions on who it's going to be?
Well, I think if Sterling Shepard is healthy, he's going to be on the team. I don't foresee an opportunity where if Sterling Shepard is on the team, that Jamison Crowder will be on the team as well. I don't know if you want those two guys both, because I think one of them, Crowder, I think would have some appeal as a punt returner. He did a little bit in Buffalo last year and then hurt his ankle. So I think if Shepard's healthy, Shep's going to be on the roster. I think too many people have moved beyond what he could bring to the table and have started talking about how it's over. And I don't think so. I think Sterling Shepard, if he's healthy, is going to get another opportunity here to show that he can be a part of this offense. The guy that, Jeff Smith is somebody to watch. I think he's somebody to watch because of his special teams value. He's a very good special teams player. We know the Giants struggled at times last year finding guys on special teams, but it's hard for me to see Smith make the roster just solely as a special teamer. I mean, it depends on what happens in other spots. So I think what you might see is guys like Jamison Crowder come back on the practice squad. You have them on a practice squad. They're a veteran on the practice squad. Then you can call them up on a week-to-week basis if you need them. Crowder may look at it and say, this is a great opportunity for me. I may not be in the slot right now, but they have one or two injuries, and all of a sudden I'm in this offense, and by week 5, I'm making plays here, because of the uncertainty regarding Wan'Dale and Shep. The other guy to watch this summer is Colin Johnson. I think he looked very good in the spring. He's coming back from the Achilles that he had in the summer. And, he brings a different body type to this offense. And I think in the summer, we're going to see Colin Johnson and see how close he is back to where he was last summer when he really was making a push for a roster spot.
Yeah.
The difference with Colin, though, too, Adriana, is maybe they get him through waivers and put him on the practice squad and have him as a call up as well. A lot of times we get caught up in waivers and the idea of, this guy will never get through. This guy will never get through. When you're talking about guys like Colin Johnson, he hasn't played in over in a year and a half since he's been on the field.
Yeah.
There aren't going to be many teams in the beginning of the season who on that last round of cuts are going to claim Colin Johnson and put him on their 53. I mean, that's not going to happen. So I think those are really the guys to watch. We know the injured guys, but I think Colin Johnson is really the guy who can make things very interesting this summer if he plays well in the preseason and where he fits in this offense.
Yeah. A lot of Giants fans have a lot of faith and hope that Bryce Ford-Wheaton has a shot at it. What do you think? I think maybe more likely a practice squad, if anything, but I think people are very optimistic that he's got a shot.
We've seen this before, right? I mean, the Marcus Soup Harris, the Corey Washington, we go on and on and on. I do think that Bryce Ford-Wheaton is here for a reason. They liked his game. They liked his film. They want to give him an opportunity. But I find it hard to believe that the Giants are going to allow him to beat out one of the guys that are kind of their mainstays. So it's very hard for me to see him make the 53. Now, could he be a developmental wide receiver on the practice squad? Absolutely. I think he could be on the practice squad. I think on the practice squad, depending on depth, you could see 3 or 4 wide receivers that are on the practice squad that the Giants still view as developmental players. Khalil Pimpleton, Mekhi Polk, guys who were here last year. We still are waiting, or I am waiting to see Pimpleton as a returner in the NFL. Can he do it? So I think there might be a situation where this position, you may be cheating a little bit to keep some of those guys on the practice squad, but I find it hard to believe that those guys are going to go elsewhere in a claiming situation. I think it would really probably be beneficial for them to come back here because, look, if you're a part of this offense and you spent the entire summer here, you do have an opportunity if guys get hurt. And let's be honest, the Giants have had guys get hurt over the last couple of years, and you would have never expected opportunities for guys like Isaiah Hodgins, who, just point to Isaiah Hodgins and say, you want an opportunity? There's a guy who got an opportunity and took advantage of it. So I do think that this will shake out, but you're definitely right. We're all going to be writing about the wide receivers every day. It's going to be this guy made a catch, this guy made a catch, because they're shying away from contact more and more. You're not going to see many run drills. It's going to be passing. It's going to be wide receivers versus the corners. You mentioned the corners before. I got just one spot. That slot spot is going to be very interesting. Is it Cordell Flott? Is it Darnay Holmes? Darnay has that salary now hanging over him the way Darius Slayton did last year because of the performance, and he got the bump in pay. He's up over $2 million as a salary cap hit. So Darnay is not only has to beat out Flott and maybe some of the other guys, he has to beat out the idea that, he's worth that $2 million salary cap hit. So that's a spot that I think we're going to be talking about a lot this summer. What do they do beyond Jackson, Adoree, and Banks? Who's there? Where does Nick McLeod fit in? Because I think he's a valuable player. Flott versus Holmes, I think, is a very big spot for this team going into the summer.
Yeah, another one that I'm excited to watch for. And Cordell Flott is another guy from that class that I really liked. He showed some flashes last year, and I hope that we'll see some more from him. So I just have two more quick questions. With what happened with Jarrad Davis, do you think that there's any chance that the Giants bring in a veteran linebacker?
I do. I don't know. It wouldn't be more than a minimum deal. I don't think that they're all of a sudden going to start, we gotta clear space because we have to bring in a veteran. But I think Deion Jones was here. He worked out in the spring. He's the kind of guy that I could see fit Wink Martindale's defense. He played relatively well in Cleveland from what I gathered last year. So it's not like he's beyond it. There have been conflicting reports, scouting reports on Miles Jack, what he would bring to the table at this point. Do they look to last year? I think, they weren't happy with the position last year. They kind of viewed, Jalen Smith and Landon Collins and Tony Jefferson as kind of those stopgaps, the safety hybrids, in addition to Jalen. But I think coming out of the gates, if Beavers is healthy, I think Beavers and Micah McFadden, another draft pick, they're going to get an opportunity. And I think, one of them or both of them may claim more opportunities and chances than maybe will be led to believe. And let's not forget, I tweeted this the other day, we're all calling Jarrad Davis the starting inside linebacker, and the Giants don't want to play in the traditional 3-4, which would have two inside linebackers. Most likely, they may start that way in a game, but the NFL is spent in sub packages with, one linebacker and four safeties and three corners. And we saw Wink Martindale do that a lot last year. So it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of times we're looking at Bobby Okereke as the true inside linebacker. And then you have a safety, like I said, a Nick McLeod, Jason Pinnock can play in the box. I think you'll see Xavier McKinney move up a lot. So that'll be interesting. So I think in base defense, the Jarrad Davis departure, or at least anticipated departure for a good part of the season, will affect the base defense. But I don't know how much the Giants are going to be in base defense. There will be times, but I just think that he's not going to Wink is not going to look to that. They want to mix things up. They want to get their best players on the field, their playmakers, and try to take advantage of teams, not just play you straight up the way, teams want to just attack you.
Definitely. I think that's one of the things that we all love about Wink is that he loves to mix it up. So it's exciting to watch. Let's finish it out with, we can't end this podcast without talking about Saquon Barkley. I think we all saw his tweet last night about the details that came out about the contract situation. So, we all saw what happened with Jones. It came down to the wire with Monday, 4 p.m. being only a few days away. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, it's funny about that tweet, right? Everybody sees the tweet, and I think only a small percentage of people actually knew what he meant by putting the two caps there. So
I didn't know that.
it was no cap. It was no cap. If you put no cap, that means true, but he put caps up, so that means lies. So I'm glad everyone figured that out eventually. That he's saying that it was a lie. I think it really comes down to the numbers that Saquon has had a problem with. That may or may not be true that have been put out there. Again, I haven't spoken to Saquon. I heard all his comments at his camp. Unfortunately, I was unable to be there. Look, you mentioned the Daniel Jones thing on that Monday. I think if you talk to anyone at around 12 o'clock on that deadline day for Daniel Jones, they probably would have thought he was getting the tag. And then it legitimately didn't come together until I think it was 3:40 something at a 4 o'clock deadline. I have a hard time seeing Saquon roll the dice on 1 year if the Giants raise the guarantees enough to cover him and give him financial security. Now, will the Giants do that? I don't know. I know they have all the leverage. I don't know how much Joe Schoen wants to exert that. I do know that the Giants are better this season with Saquon than without. And do you want to welcome that on Tuesday of next week? You may be staring at another month plus without Saquon Barkley. I'm not sure. I don't know what the desire is for Joe Schoen in the front office to do that. But I got to say, I think the Giants will give a little. I think Saquon might have to give more. But I still will be surprised if 4 o'clock comes and goes on Monday and he doesn't have a long-term deal. Now, is that a long-term deal, just a 3-year deal? I don't know what the numbers are going to look like, but that's kind of where I'm at right now is that, look, there's a lot of – if it gets personal and if Saquon or the Giants view this as personal, then we may be seeing the beginning stages of, Saquon Barkley is elsewhere in 2024. I mean, that's certainly possible. The Giants could use this offseason to build their offense in another direction and not bring Saquon back. But I do know that they want Saquon back. They want him at their price. I got to imagine that Saquon's going to look at it and say it's not worth sitting out week 1, week 2, and losing $600,000 a pop. It doesn't that doesn't compute with me. And I understand Saquon wants respect. And I do get the sense that there are people who believe that the Giants are disrespecting Saquon because they're treating him as just another running back. But no other running back is getting $10.1 million this year either.
Right.
Unfortunately, the market is what the market is. Should the Giants overpay? I don't think they should, but I do think there are people who believe they should. But
100%.
359, Adriana. That's when we're going to know whether or not this is going. And I know it sounds like a cop-out, but that's the reality. I mean, who is going to blink? Who will blink? I got to imagine that Saquon blinks first because he's the one who's at risk of losing money. And look, he's got a family. He wants to take care of his family. I understand he wants to be done right by. But, the Giants can ride this thing out. Would they be risking the idea that they don't have their full team in week 1? Yeah. I mean, going into the Cowboys game, you want to have all hands on deck. It's only week 1, but it's a significant week 1. But that's kind of where I see it right now. I still think when it comes down to Monday, I got to think that the deadline looks at it and goes, all right, here's our best offer. Here's our best offer. What are we going to do here? And I find it hard to believe that they're going to want to walk away because this is a player that the franchise loves. And I do believe that Saquon wants to be here. But we'll see. Look, stranger things have happened. The Giants sent away Justin Tuck. I'm old enough to remember and been on this beat. Justin Tuck went to Oakland, and he had come back with an offer and wanted the Giants to match it. And the Giants said, we're gonna move on. And Justin Tuck went to Oakland for a year. Osi Umenyiora went to the Falcons after they won the Super Bowl in 2011. So guys, legends in this franchise in recent history have gone elsewhere. So sometimes these things go down right down to the wire. I think that's going to be another one here.
Yeah, I think something that I said yesterday is let's all not hold our breath, because I do think that it's probably going to go until 3:59 on Monday. I did hear that there's a possibility that maybe Saquon changed agents. If that is true, then that potentially could speed up the process. But outside of that, I think we still will be waiting until Monday afternoon.
I saw that same thing. Obviously, it was Chris Bizignano who kind of floated
Mhm.
that out there yesterday. At least that's where I saw it on Twitter.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that. I know Saquon has always been represented by somebody. Kim Alley is his agent for contracts, but also he's always had a marketing agent through CAA that he has had on his team. So I don't know if there's some confusion there, or I haven't talked to Chris either. So I don't know what he meant or what he had heard. But if there is an agent change, it will have had to happen already, because when you change agents, there's a 5-day waiting period. So if he's changing agents today, well, then that agent can't negotiate for him for Monday. So that will have had to happen already if it happened. So I just haven't heard anything on that front, but I've heard the same thing, saw the same thing from Chris last night.
Yeah. So we'll see if we hear anything else about that. And in the meantime, we'll just be waiting around. So we'll leave it at that. We'll wait to see what happens with Saquon. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure everyone follows you and listens to the podcast already, but tell them where they can find your articles, find you on Twitter, Instagram. I know you're on Threads too.
Yeah, where aren't I? Yeah. I think best place to find my coverage is at northjersey.com. Buy a subscription. That's all I'll say. $1 for the remainder of the season. You're from Bergen County. I know you're in Connecticut now, but you get all our coverage of Bergen County. So if you live in the area, it's certainly worth it. My podcast, All In with Art Stapleton, is on anywhere you can find your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Omni, anywhere you want, Odyssey. I'll go down the line, as I'm sure you do. People can find your podcast there as well. But we'll be doing some great stuff in training camp. We're looking at having maybe a fan forum podcast at some point on site, whether it's at the Giants or somewhere else. But we'll keep everybody updated. And on Twitter is at @art_Stapleton, same as Threads, Instagram, and what have you. So